This is In Conversation, the video podcast of Banyen Books and Sound. I'm your host, Farah Nasralli, and today I'm in conversation with Carina Stone, the wife of Michael Stone, and Erin Robinsong, the editor of his book, The World Comes to You. Michael Stone was an internationally recognized yoga and Buddhist teacher, author, and host of Awake in the World podcast. His sudden and tragic death at the age of 42 was a shock to the yoga community and to the community that he helped build. And it's such an honor for me to be here with Carina and Erin to speak about the legacy of his teachings and what it meant personally, what it means to work on the book and share and keep his teachings alive. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start off by asking you, I've never attended personally the retreats or seminars or workshops of Michael Stone, but when I read the book, I really felt there was a very real presence, and I could feel something that was very alive that came through the choice of words and the cadence and rhythm. What was it like to work on the book?
Well, for me, it was really two experiences that, I started working on the book when he was alive, and it was actually a few months before his death. And that was, what he asked me to do was take transcripts of some of his talks, of ones that he had decided he really wanted to turn into a book, and asked me if I would work with these and edit them and help him make the book that it became. So there was that part where we were working back and forth, and we had this beautiful relationship in terms of editing that we'd had for many years. So I'd really, in the beginning of it, I really felt, that we were making the book that I think both of us had been kind of wanting to make for a long time in the ways that I'd been working on his writing, which was that it really came directly from his teaching, from his talks, which were just so alive and so just connected with people on such an incredible level. So there was that, and then so it was really a dream to get to turn these into then something for the page, which was different, but in some ways what we wanted to do was really keep that energy and those words and that humor and just all of the things that made him such an incredible teacher. And then there was the experience of working on it after he couldn't answer my questions about things or rewrite things, so that was a whole other experience that was also very rich and very incredible and very connected to him and connected to Carina, and we really worked on it together after his death.
Carina, what was it like for you?
It was a lot of things. Firstly, it was too hard to approach for a very long time. It was delayed quite a few times before I was able to engage it. And I remember the first time I tried to, I was on the way to a breech clinic in Vancouver to see if my baby could be turned. I was 36 and a half weeks pregnant, and we found out he was breech, and I had this sudden free time away from the kids because I was going on the ferry by myself with my father, but without kids, to see if the baby could be turned. And I thought, okay, I really have this window. Let me open this up and dive into it. And it was so much like to open that at that point in that part of my gestation and getting close to the birth. And I had to close it and leave it for many more months after the baby had been born. And then when I was really able to engage the work, it was a mixture for me of a familiarity with the process of Michael working on other material when he was alive, And me coming in, I used to come in at the end of things when he'd say, this is what I've got, like, how does this sound? And we'd hash it out on the kitchen floor after the kids are in bed, and sit there with a pen and paper, and he'd read me things, and I'd say, oh, I don't know, what about this? I'm not sure what you're saying. And so in a certain way that was very familiar, and he was very alive to me in that process. And then when it started to wrap up, I had this feeling of, oh no, like, this is finite, and here he goes again, and this is the end of this process. And thankfully, and as these things go, there were many layers of like getting proofs back and whatnot, so it did get to go on and on for quite some time, and the whole thing really did feel like collaboration. And working with Erin certainly I felt like it was very much like me and Michael and Erin, like going back and forth between various things. And I would say, well, like, oh, what if, this could be slightly different here, and then it might be more clear. And I'm really into clarity. and Michael, like Erin, would have said, but wait a minute, there's poetry in that phrase and the way that's phrased, and that's more important than the clarity in that moment. And or saying it in the way it says something, with more color and difference and depth. And anyhow, so I really felt Erin's commitment to his voice, and I felt this like complex, like, life and death dialogue happening with Michael and with the work. And I feel that in this book so much. I feel like he's gone, and he's really in this material, and that's a comfort, and there's sadness.
Yeah, both. I was even wondering if working on the book and being reminded of some of the practices and some of the wisdom was a source in dealing with the grief and the loss.
Mm-hmm. For me, I feel like this book comes from his life, and I think when you read it, you feel him, you feel his candidness, and you catch glimpses of his mental health and his candidness with that. For me, what resonates with me in the book is also what supports me in my grieving process and losing him. And I don't feel like I'm learning it for the first time in the book, because the book comes from Michael, and Michael comes from relationship and our family, and not just as a teaching, but as like a partner, and that's like so intimate. So I feel him in me, I feel him in my mind, I feel him in my day and in my children. And so I feel like what supports me in the book are things that I learned from him in life also. And in the book there are certain moments that really reflect something really crisply to me, that I really feel supported from him by in life and in the book. And I have one example, if I may. In chapter 21, he talks about going on a hike in Japan and in Kyoto, and he really needs to pee, and he finds a Shinto temple, and he asks, where's the bathroom? Can I find the bathroom? And they say downstairs, and they point downstairs, and he walks down the stairs, and it's dark, and he gets into this open space where there's many candles, and I believe urns also. And there's a caretaker, a Shinto priest, who's maintaining the candles and maintaining the altar. And he sees the altar, and he goes to light some incense and bows down underneath the curtain. And when he looks up, there's a mirror. And so he sees his face and cries. And that's the whole, for him, that's the whole practice. And in that moment, and just in that moment, that was his response, to be vulnerable and to receive that message of the practice is your life. It's showing up in your own life exactly right now. And that's what's on the altar. That's what we bow to. And I felt that in being his partner, I felt that in him all the time, his curiosity and his engagedness with his own interpersonal self. He was constantly curious about his way in the world. And for me, that's in the book very richly, and that was in his life richly, and that supports me so much, because everything remains a question. And especially after losing him, everything's very much a question. constantly, and knowing and having learned from him, and feeling his curiosity, I feel the resiliency to engage that with curiosity sometimes.
I remember very clearly the chapter you're talking about because it was so touching. I forget what the question was, but Erin, was there something in the book that really spoke to you, that spoke of Michael and who he was and how he lived his life?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think that it's a really magic book in this way that I've, even when Michael was alive, as I was reading and shaping this material, it seemed to always, several times, it would relate to exactly what was going on in my life, that was hard, that I didn't want to be in the way that it was. So when I started working on the book, I was breaking up with my long-term partner, and everything that the book was saying was helping me get through this, which was such a strange situation in some ways as an editor, because it would be, I was supposed, it never really works like this, but I was supposed to be like working on the material, but the material was working on me at the same time. And so I think that when I say that the book is very magic, I think I just mean that in every page, it's Michael really helping or showing the way to see what's really going on in whatever situation that is, and a way to become friends with that, and a way to even engage with it in a way that's very different than I might otherwise engage, which would, to want to have things be different, to to want things to be simpler or better or happier. And but I think what this book, and really what the kind of teacher that Michael is in this book, and was in his life and continues to be in all of his work, it's really just helping people make friends with what's going on and what's really happening. And in that friendship, that there's so much, there's a kind of a different kind of engagement that becomes, it was still very, like, it was very, very, very difficult, and remains very difficult to get through the loss of my friend and my teacher, and all the things that Michael was to me. But I think there is a way that the material in this book, in this very kind of meta way, was also helping me to be with his death in a very different way than I might otherwise. And he did that in his life too. He really, all of the time that I knew Michael, he was giving me language for death and for hard things, and for experience and for reality. And so, sorry, that's a very long answer now. But yes, I think that this book gave me a lot of tools for dealing with his death and so many other things. And that's one of his real gifts.
As I hear you speak, I'm reminded of one of the chapters in which he talks about the pond skater insect, and it's a chapter called Fluidity, and it really spoke to me just about the nature of reality not being a concrete, existent thing, but a dynamic, fluid thing. And I'm wondering if either of you can speak to that in terms of your own experience of that in your life, or even as it relates to the book and that specific chapter.
Yeah, I think throughout the book, Michael is encouraging this possibility of building a life out of that which is changing, which is not what most of us are doing most of the time. So often, and for me, with losing him, although we lived with knowing he lived with bipolar, and there's a fragility there, and we knew that that fragility was there. We had this sense, I had this sense that this is our narrative, and this is what's going to happen, and we have this family, and I've planted orchard trees that are going to fruit, and here we are in this on this island, and the sense of things are going to unfold in this sort of predictable way, and knowing there is this fragility. But losing him erased all of that. Everything that was predictable and knowable was dissolved. And we were in the same house for some time, and then had to move, and our family looked different, and the future was a question, and what the future was going to look like, and it remains a question. And I think that experience really has shown me that those things they're always questions, and the facade that they're not is possibly a source of great suffering, actually. But I think the pond skater has the benefit of its actual habitat is ever changing, an ever changing surface. So they don't have that facade of like solid ground. And I think that's for the pond skater as a meditation, or as a metaphor for the meditator, is that actually things are constantly changing, and our minds are constantly changing. Things are arising and falling, and so making a home in that and becoming comfortable with that is a way of learning how to navigate what's actually really happening all the time, which is flux. And yeah, I don't know, Erin, if you want to say more.
I think I just love this kind of mascot or metaphor for the idea of groundless ground, that especially because it's such a Michael metaphor, it's so funny in a way, like this long-legged insect that sort of magically, but also through physics, can walk on water, and that's how it lives, and it senses all kinds of things through the vibrations on the water, and it really is just, I think, a very helpful metaphor that's also very real in the world. How else one could be in relation to change and the fact that things aren't solid, and keep living in that.
And as I'm listening, I'm also thinking about the juxtaposition of the other chapter, which is on, taking an everyday activity and making it sacred, and bringing a different energy to it. Like, he gave several examples of that, and how important sometimes ritual or specific activities can be grounding in context of a very fluid, changing reality. And I'm wondering if either of you have done that, have taken everyday activities and made a ritual out of it as a way of finding that sense of groundedness, and way of reconnecting to breath and reconnecting to something that's very real and tangible.
Yeah, certainly. I think my children give me lots of opportunities for practicing, and for me, responding to them from a place of not reacting to in a patterned way, or in a way that I learned. That's like the most meaningful site of practice for me, is that gap between something happening with a child of mine and my ability to respond, and to respond in a way that's responding to what's happening underneath what appears to be happening. And so taking a moment for that, that's my greatest sight. And I just got baby goats. I got 2 baby goats and 1 5-year-old goat who's fully in milk. So I'm nursing her, I'm milking her every night. And it's like blowing my mind how meditative it is, like such a wonderful practice. that the first night I did it, I was actually out there in the dark and milking her into this pail in the dark. It took an hour, and I had no idea what I was doing. I had an idea what I was doing, but really I was a novice. And just feeling her udder and the milk filling up, and it's all like body, mind, you like so in sync and in sync with Fawn, the 5-year-old doe. And yeah, that's like a wonderful practice that I'm doing every night right now. But I would recommend that.
I have a morning practice that I've been doing for the past few months. I tend to change mine, but I've been doing this one where like I get up really early, which is not my natural state at all. And and I used to like put on the kettle and then go back to bed and like reset the alarm and get up on the kettle. Well, it was just this very kind of painful, horrible process of waking up. But what I've been doing for the last few months that has really kind of changed my entire day is I put on the kettle and then I just look out the window and really try to like really see what's out the window, which is the same window every day, it's the same tree, and just breathe and look out the window. And it's so simple, and I just do that while the kettle is boiling, and it literally just opens up time. It's like exactly the time I just want to go back to sleep, and where like 5 minutes happens in like 1 second, and I'm like, oh god, I have to get up. But really, just like it's just like opening up the moments of the time it takes the kettle to boil, and it changes my day, like almost more than doing sitting meditation for me right now. It's just really seeing, and I started to notice all the all the birds who are around and the fact that they always seem to be flying only to the right, and and the tree just as it was like changing every day, because I'm in Montreal and it was dead looking at the beginning of this practice, and now it's in just total full leaf. And so that's been mine lately.
You know, both of you mentioned in describing those practices space. Carina, you mentioned the word gap. And one thing that I really resonated with in the book is the connection between that space and gap and creativity and imagination. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about how creativity can spontaneously emerge from that space or gap when we're not in habitual response to our life and our surroundings and the people around us.
Yeah, Michael was really interested in patterns and the patterns that we move through, or that we're constrained by to respond in particular ways that are habitual. And so the gap is the place where that pattern stops for a moment. And in Buddhist meditation, when you move through the Noble Truths, it's where you stay with something, and there's a stopping, and in that gap, something new can happen. But ultimately, that's where there's space, and the space can be calm, and there can be contentment there, and there can be a creative response. For me, that happens with my kids. That's my greatest goal, is that happens with my children. Since Michael died, that a massive rupture happened, and that's also a gap. And for me, what that means to me now is I feel like I'm creatively re-engaging myself. Like, who am I now, and how am I changed, and what do I need? What do I want? What are my desires? And so, and in a strange way, like it's a gift, you know. There's a gift there in being able to really reflect on who I am now, and I'm not sure that I'd be engaging it this fully if he hadn't died. yeah, I think that's the end of my thought.
Thank you.
I was so into what Karina was saying that I've forgotten the question.
The question, if you feel inspired to answer, is about imagination and creativity and the connection to that gap or space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, it's like when I started doing meditation, I was very interested in this idea that this paradoxical seeming idea that somehow emptying out and being still could be actually this really rich source of imagination, but I couldn't put that together for myself, and I was a bit scared of it. I was like, I don't want to. This is the opposite of what I want to do creatively, is empty out or be still. And but I think now it feels meditation practice and meditative practices and practices in general really are the biggest source, I think, of imagination, because they they change. I think I was thinking of it as this difference, as sort of the separation between doing and being, which now seems such a ridiculous kind of this versus this situation, because I think that making art and imagination and creativity in all the ways that we're just creative in our daily lives comes out of a state of being, whatever the state of being is that we're in. And I think what practice does for me is, in that gap, shows me all the or presents myriad possibilities for perception and for being, and um, and so there's so many choices available at all times, whether it's in making a sentence or whether it's in even just looking at something. I think often of this thing that John Cage said, which is someone that I think Michael was very interested in as well. And he said, looking closely helps. And so I think these are all connected to the ways that that practice for me is this imaginative practice of perception and of looking closely. And that for me is really an endless source of, we call it creativity, that's just there already.
You know, on that note of perception and creativity, Carina, would how would you like your children to perceive their father and who he is and who he was, and how does creativity and possibility play into that piece?
Yeah, that's something I think about a lot. How do I want them? I want them to know him the most intimately that they can, and that's going to be a challenge, I think. And I feel like we have this time when our kids are little, where they aren't exposed to all of his work. You know, they are exposed to his family stories and his photos and all of our memories and our little pilgrimages to favorite spots. And to me, that's like, he's in that in such an important way, and just his way of being in the world and his humor and his commitment to what's most important to them. Like, I want them to feel that the most. And I have a bit of a fear, like, oh my gosh, the most material that's out there, it overwhelms our family album, you know. All of his talks and written works and audio material, it's far more than we have collected in our what we family photos, and we have our stories, but once they're teenagers and they can read and they're out there, I worry about the balance of them knowing him intimately the way he was in our home, singing and making breakfast and like blitzing through all the dishes, and like having a great idea about what to do for the day, and like lots of energy, like that feeling that's domestic. I want them to have that. And yeah, so that comes through our story, retelling stories and looking at photos, and trying to hold him in the home as much as we can. We have an altar for him, and we say goodnight to him when we remember to, and, and light a candle for him and show him things. My oldest son lost his first tooth last night, and yeah, I know. And he asked the tooth fairy to keep it so he could put it on the altar to show his dad, and that's how I want them to feel him, um, and I really imagine that he's going to be a spiritual father for them in so many ways, and through his formal teaching also. And at some point, they're really going to want to engage that, and I look forward to that. In terms of creatively imagining him, I guess that's where I worry too. It's like I want him to be himself with them, and I hope that somehow how they creatively imagine him matches that, at least somewhat closely. And part of that too is all the depth of him, all the ways that he was imperfect, and the ways that he could be frustrated. And I think when kids lose a parent when they're really little, there's this idealizing a parent phase that's still happening when they're really little, and they didn't get to like really see his side so much, maybe in a way that they'll really retain and remember. And that's important, I think, where parents are complex and dynamic, and they're not just superheroes. So yeah, I guess I hope that we can hold him in the home in a way where he's dynamic. Yeah.
As I was listening to you speak, I also was just reminded of another dimension to Michael Stone and his teachings that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet, and that is just the commitment to action in the world and what's happening in the world at large and on the planet. And one of the things that I really deeply loved in the book was the rewriting of the Bodhisattva vows, which I feel really spoke so much to that. I'm wondering if you can either speak on that dimension of Michael, or even share that process, or even read the vows with us.
Yes, I can. I have them in front of me here. So the story, what we're talking about, there's a chapter in the book that talks about Bernie Glassman, and how Bernie Glassman, who a great Zen teacher, American Zen teacher, made his practice bearing witness to suffering. And in his context in New York, he, perceiving the homelessness and social struggles in the city, he created a foundation, the Greystone Foundation, that founded a bakery where they employed homeless people. And it's a longer story, and I can't tell it perfectly, but ultimately they became very successful, and have, I believe, possibly a still continuing contract with Ben and Jerry's, where they are creating brownies for many of their recipes. But they're employing homeless people, and raising money, and all this money is going towards supporting community needs in many very important ways. And their community mandala just grew and grew and grew through this business. And Michael and I actually went to the Zen Peacemakers conference in Massachusetts as one of our, I wouldn't say first dates, but like first trips together. And that's where he met Bernie, and asked him about this project of his. And so anyhow, this is the context in this chapter whereby we also talk about the Bodhisattva vows that we would chant on retreat. And they, as Michael says in the book, they express an effort towards the impossible. So the Bodhisattva vows read, you would repeat these 3 times. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. The dharmas are boundless. I vow to master them. The Buddha way is unattainable. I vow to attain it. And Bernie's advice to Michael was to choose battles that are small enough to win but big enough to matter. And so over time, and it was partly through Michael and I talking about what's really, what do we really need now? We live in this time where we hear nonstop about climate change, like we're beyond, you know, these social issues and so many impossible things, and all the impossibility of so many of these social issues are possibly paralyzing, and these vows that are an effort towards the unattainable are possibly, in this cultural context where we're facing really paralyzing stuff, what do we need to hear now? Like, what do we need to hear now that we can really achieve things that are small, so achievable, not necessarily small. But so we, over time, we changed the vows, and this is probably taboo that we changed. This was for
loved it.
This was for our community, right? And you know, all the Roshis out there, like, this was for us. Beings are numberless. I vow to serve them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unattainable. I vow to embody it. I think for Michael, this was similar to like eating local food. You know, like, what can you do? Like, what can you really do that's like possible and within grasp of your life and impactful? And yes, like, even reaching towards the impossible is so important, and we need that. And like, what can we do, and what can we do now, and how can we respond now? And for Michael, that's what those vows were reflecting. I believe. I can't, he's not here to interject and say, well, actually I was, you know. I think that's as much as I'll say about that. But Erin, I wonder if you want to follow up.
No, that was great. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, just in terms of looking at the book as a whole, what is your personal hope for this book and for his legacy and for the impact of the book and even beyond?
I wish for the book that, I guess I have a lot of wishes for the book. I hope people like it. I hope people feel Michael in it, and that people notice his vulnerability and how much he's sharing, and how much he's sharing in between the lines. And I know what he would want is, he would want people to feel inspired and to feel comforted. And I hope that that comes through. I believe it does. And I wish for curiosity for those that read the book, to open to the curiosity they may have about themselves, and maybe Michael's work, but ultimately to themselves and their own lives and relationships. And to the possibility that folks who live with atypical neurological beings offer, like Michael lived with bipolar. His wiring was different. He could perceive things in a different way that made him vulnerable, and that made him really tapped into rich things. And I hope that in Michael's death and in this book, something more can open towards folks who have so much to offer from the margins.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will just add that I really hope that this book can be a companion for people in a really practical way. For I think it offers real practical help and poetic help and imaginative possibilities. And I really hope that people can. My hope for the book is that people can truly take up the invitations that are all through this book, or other ways to engage with what's going on personally, what's going on in their relationships, what's going on politically and environmentally in the world. I think in this book is divided into 3 sections: notes on practice, notes on love, and notes on social action. And so it's really deliberate that all of this whole, what seems like a spectrum of subject matter is really deeply connected in all of Michael's work, and it's full of invitations. But as Carina said, there's a lot between the lines too, and it is a very poetic book in that there's a lot for you to do as the reader, and that's intentional, so that what emerges is really can be new every time. He doesn't say everything that he means. He often gives these, and I think that's why it's a book of Dharma too, because it's an invitation to engage with your life and with the material and what comes out of that. And so I hope that this book can really be a good companion in that way, and a teacher and a friend, which it really has been for me all the way through.
The last question I have is, you mentioned the book being divided into 3 things, and we've talked about 2 of them. We've talked about practice, and we've talked about social action. Carina, what final words can you say about love and what you've learned about love from Michael and the life that he lived?
From what I learned from Michael, just love everyone so much, as hard as he can, all the time. And I think that's in those chapters too. And what's underneath the love part really, again, is impermanence. And I think Michael really felt impermanence in his life. And so his love was very big. And so the practice of feeling impermanence and being willing to sense impermanence, I think that's just like fertilizer for love. So let it in. Don't be scared. And because it's not gonna, that part doesn't go away.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end our time together on that note of the enduring quality of love, and the reminder of that, the truth of impermanence. So I want to thank both of you. It's really been moving to me personally to both have the opportunity to read the book and also connect with both of you here through the miracles of cyberspace. Thank you so much. And Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.